يا أماه. فقلت وعليك السلام يا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي. فقال يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم إن جدك تحت الكساء فاقبل حسن نحو الكساء. وقال السلام عليك يا جداه يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أدخل معك تحت الكساء؟ فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا صاحب حوضي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معه تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآله. فما كانت إلا ساعة وإذا بولد الحسين قد أقبل وقال السلام عليك يا أماه. فقلت عليك السلام يا ولدي ويا قرة عيني وثمرة فؤادي. فقال لي يا أماه إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة جد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم إن جدك وأخاك تحت الكساء. فدنا الحسين نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا جداه والسلام عليك يا من اختاره الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكما تحت الكساء؟ فقال وعليك السلام يا ولدي ويا شافع أمتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخل معهما تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فأقبل عند ذلك أبو الحسن علي بن أبي طالب وقال السلام عليك يا بنت رسول الله. فقلت وعليك السلام يا أبا الحسن ويا أمير المؤمنين. فقال يا فاطمة إني أشم عندك رائحة طيبة كأنها رائحة أخي وابن عم رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله. فقلت نعم ها هو مع ولديك تحت الكساء. فأقبل علي نحو الكساء وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله، وتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال له وعليك السلام يا أخي ويا وصي وخليفتي وصاحب اللواء، قد أذنت لك. فدخل علي تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآله. ثم آتيت نحو الكساء وقلت السلام عليك يا أبتاه يا رسول الله، أتأذن لي أن أكون معكم تحت الكساء؟ قال وعليك السلام يا بنتي ويا بضعتي، قد أذنت لك. فدخلت تحت الكساء. اللهم صل على محمد وآله. فلما اكتملنا جميعا تحت الكساء أخذ أبي رسول الله بطرفي الكساء وأومى بيده اليمنى إلى السماء وقال اللهم إن هؤلاء أهل بيتي وخاصتي وحامتي، لحمهم لحمي ودمهم دمي، يؤلمني ما يؤلمهم ويحزنني ما يحزنهم. أنا حرب لمن حاربهم وسلم لمن سالمهم وعدو لمن عاداهم ومحب لمن أحبهم. إنهم مني وأنا منهم، فاجعل صلواتك وبركاتك ورحمتك وغفرانك ورضوانك علي وعليهم، وأذهب عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآله. فقال الله عز وجل يا ملائكتي ويا سكان سماواتي، إني ما خلقت السماء مبنيا ولا أرضا مدحيا ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضية ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا في محبة هؤلاء الخمسة الذين هم تحت الكساء. فقال الأمين جبرائيل يا ربي ومن تحت الكساء؟ فقال عز وجل هم أهل بيت النبوة ومعدن الرسالة، هم فاطمة وأبوها وبعلها وبنوها. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. فقال جبرائيل يا رب أتأذن لي أن أحبط إلى الأرض لأكون معهم سادسا؟ فقال الله نعم قد أذنت لك. فهبط الأمين جبرائيل وقال السلام عليك يا رسول الله. العلي الأعلى يقرئك السلام ويخصك بالتحية والإكرام ويقول لك وعزتي وجلالي إني ما خلقت السماء مبنيا ولا أرضا مدحيا ولا قمرا منيرا ولا شمسا مضية ولا فلكا يدور ولا بحرا يجري ولا فلكا يسري إلا لعجلكم ومحبتكم وقد أذن لي أن أدخل معكم فهل تأذن لي يا رسول الله؟ فقال رسول الله وعليك السلام يا أمين وحي الله فإنه نعم قد أذنت لك. فدخل جبرائيل معنا تحت الكساء فقال لأبي إن الله قد أوحى إليكم يقول إنما يريد الله ليذهب عنكم الرجس أهل البيت ويطهركم تطهيرا. الله. فقال علي لأبي يا رسول الله أخبرني ما لجلوسنا هذا تحت الكساء من الفضل عند الله؟ فقال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واصطفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيتنا ومحبينا إلا ونزلت عليهم الرحمة وحفت بهم الملائكة واستغفرت لهم إلى أن يتفرقوا. فقال علي عليه السلام إذا والله فزنا وفاز شيعتنا ورب الكعبة. فقال أبي رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله يا علي والذي بعثني بالحق نبيا واستفاني بالرسالة نجيا ما ذكر خبرنا هذا في محفل من محافل أهل الأرض وفيه جمع من شيتنا ومحبينا وفيهم محموم لله وفرج الله هما ولا مغموم إلا وكشف الله غما ولا طالب حاجة إلا وقضى الله حاجة. فقال علي عليه السلام إذا والله فزنا وسعدنا وكذلك شيعتنا فازوا وسعدوا في الدنيا والآخرة ورب الكعبة. اللهم صل على
Assalamu alaikum. I'm going to be reading a small poem titled The Hero of Karbala by Sayyid Ahmad Ali Mohani. Salawat. Many, many years ago, on the bloody field of Karbala, a noble hero faced his foe. As champion of God's faith and law, overhead there was no scorching sun. There were no shady trees beneath the burning sandy plain with no refreshing breeze. A scion of Hashem's noble line of heroism and model. Son of Ali, the Lion of God, grandson of God's apostle. His comrades few but loyal and brave, some young and some advanced in age, and the record of whose actions gave to history its brightest page. From friend and foe, a world of praise, his friends with loving grief he eyed, lying dead in sun's scorching rays. To justify his aim he tried to deal with foes in peaceful ways. He brought in arms his baby son. He brought in arms his baby son, asked them to give him water. He asked him to give him water, said he, the babe no harm has done, to die of thirst or slaughter. Stones they threw and the arrows shot, obedient to Yazid's behest, in their fury spread not, even life of a baby at the breast. A little before his enemies were, for water sorely past. Relief he gave them then and there, he could not see even foes distressed. He humbly prayed and praised the Lord, the giver of spiritual beauty. And though midst danger never failed to do his sacred duty. Wickedness can go no further. Cruelty needs no greater proofs. His sacred body after death was trampled under horses' hooves. Victory though mean they gained, but still no bound knew their ear. Orphans and widows they captives made, then set their tents on fire. Ah, the captives saw with choking grief, the eyes dim with tears, the tragic sight of martyrs' heads lifted upon tears. Salawat.
اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد. آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین. آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین. تیرا چہرہ تیری آنکھیں بھول کب پائی حسین. چلتے ناخے سے گرایا خود کو جلتی ریت پر. چلتے ناخے سے گرایا خود کو چلتی ریت پر. گھٹنیوں کے بل میں تیری لاش تک آئی حسین. بس میں گھبرائی تھی خنجر تجھ پہ چلتا دیکھ کر. بس میں گھبرائی تھی خنجر تجھ پہ چلتا دیکھ کر. پھر کسی مشکل میں گر کر میں نہ گھبرائی حسین. کون تھا جو مرنے والوں میں نہیں تھا خوبرو. کون تھا جو مرنے والوں میں نہیں تھا خوبرو. بھولنے بیٹھی تو کس کس کی نہ یاد آئی حسین. بہہ رہے تھے آنکھ سے آنسو تیری رخصت کے وقت. بہہ رہے تھے آنکھ سے آنسو تیری رخصت کے وقت. پھر کوئی آنسو نہ ٹپکا آنکھ پتھرائی حسین. ہاتھ میں کوزے لیے سب آسماں تکتے رہے، ہاتھ میں کوزے لیے سب آسماں تکتے رہے، ابر نے ایک بوند پانی کی نہ برسائی حسین، دور فتادہ سفر سے لوٹ کر میں نے نوید، دور فتادہ سفر سے لوٹ کر میں نے نوید، ٹھنڈا پانی جب پیا بس تیری یاد آئی حسین، آج بھی زینب کی آتی ہے صدا بھائی حسین، صلوات پر محمد والوں کی۔
اللہ
یہ خط میں بابا کو صغرا نے لکھا حال تواں، رجب کی 30ویں کو تم نے گھر کیا ویراں، تمہارے بعد ہوئی بابا جان، بروح حمزہ نہ تھی مجھے میں فاتحہ کی تواں، تمام روز تڑپتے تڑپتے رات ہوئی، ہمارے گھر میں نا عید شب برات ہوئی، ہمارے گھر میں نا عید شب برات ہوئی، وہ عید تو گئی دن عید فطر کا آیا، گھرانے کر میری ہم جولیوں نے رلوایا، کسی نے گہنا کسی نے لباس دکھلایا، کوئی بولی کے عیدی میں ہم نے یہ پایا، ہر ایک خوش تھا مگر میرے لب پہ نالے تھے، صفحے میں سب میرے عیدی کے دینے والے تھے، سفر میں سب میرے عیدی کے دینے والے تھے، وہ خوش عید پہ کیا جو خلق کا مارا ہو، قسم لو بابا جو کرتا پھٹا اتارا ہو، وطن میں لوٹ کے آنا اگر دوبارہ ہو تو پھر سے عید ہو، نوروز بھی دوبارہ ہو تو پھر سے عید ہو، نوروز بھی دوبارہ ہو، ہماری عید تو کلبے کی دید ہے بابا، جب آپ آئیں اسی روز عید ہے بابا۔ درود بھیجیے گا محمد والے۔
ایک اور باوز بلند درود پڑھیں۔ اللہم صلی علی محمد مرزا دبیر کے مرثیے کے چند بند سے پہلے ایک سورہ فاتحہ اپنے تمام مرحومین کے ساتھ ساتھ بانی مجلس کے مرحومین کا۔ میدان میں خاندان لٹا آل نبی کا، میدان میں خاندان لٹا آل نبی کا، گھر ہو گیا تاراج امام میں دوسرا کا، گھر ہو گیا تاراج امام میں دوسرا کا، کنبا ہوا محبوب شاہ عقدہ کشا کا، اوریا ہوا سر بلوے میں خاصان خدا کا، اوریا ہوا سر بلوے میں خاصان خدا کا، جن بیویوں کا سایہ نہ دیکھا تھا کسی نے، افسوس نے بے پردہ کیا فوج شقی نے، افسوس نے بے پردہ کیا فوج شقی نے، اکبر کے بچھڑنے کا کسی رانڈ کو غم تھا، اکبر کے بچھڑنے کا کسی رانڈ کو تھا غم، کوئی غم اصغر میں فغا کرتی تھی پیہم، حیدر کے نواسوں کا کوئی کرتی تھی ماتم، قاسم کو کوئی روتی تھی گردن کو کیے خم، کوئی غم عباس میں مصروف بکا تھی،
لب پر کسی کے آئے حسین کی صدا تھی، لب پر کسی کے آئے حسین کی صدا تھی، اور کہتی تھی کوئی لٹ گیا مقتل میں میرا راج، مارا گیا ہے پسر صاحب میرا، اور کہتی تھی کوئی خانہ زہرا ہوا تاراج، ہے ہوئی اب ایک ردا کے لیے محتاج، چلاتی تھی کوئی مجھے صدمہ یہ بڑا ہے، وارث میرا بے گورو کفن رن میں پڑا ہے، وارث میرا بے گورو کفن رن میں پڑا ہے، حلقے میں جفاکاروں کے تھے عابد بیمار، شدت سے تپے غم کی غشا جاتا تھا ہر بار، حداد یہ کہتا تھا کہ اے شمر ستمگار، پہناؤں کسے بیڑیاں اور توق گراں بار، گردن نہیں یہ توق گلوگیر کے قابل، یہ پاؤں نہیں حلقائے زنجیر کے قابل، یہ پاؤں نہیں حلقائے زنجیر کے قابل، اور توق اس کو پہناتے ہیں جو ہوتا ہے توانا، دشوار ہے بیمار کو گردن کا اٹھانا، ان کانپتے پاؤں میں نہ زنجیر پہنانا، ورنہ بھی ہو جائے گا دم تن سے روانہ، نہ پاؤں ہے اس بوجھ کے لائق نہ گلا ہے، یہ زوفیز کے لیے زنجیر بلا ہے، یہ زوفیز کے لیے زنجیر بلا ہے، آدھا کی یہ تاکید تھی رانڈوں کا یہ تھا حال، سر پیٹتی تھی چہروں پہ بکھرے ہوئے تھے بال، سر پیٹتی تھی چہروں پہ بکھرے ہوئے تھے بال، چلاتی تھی بانو میرا لوٹا گیا اقبال، میرا ڈوئی قتل ہوا فاطمہ کا لال، کیوں کرنا دہائی دوں رسول دو سرا کی، سر ننگے ہے بلوے میں باہو شیر خدا کی، سر ننگے ہے بلوے میں باہو شیر خدا کی، چلاتی تھی مقتل کی طرف زینب مستر، یا سبت نبی لوٹی گئی آپ کے خواہر، بازو میرے رسی سے بندھے چھن گئی چادر، حلقے میں ستم گاروں کے تنہا ہوں کھلے سر، حلقے میں ستم گاروں کے تنہا ہوں کھلے سر، فریاد ہے منہ اشکوں سے دھونا نہیں ملتا، تم قتل ہوئے اور مجھے رونا نہیں ملتا، تم قتل ہوئے اور مجھے رونا نہیں ملتا، میدان میں خاندان لٹا، درود بر محمد و آل محمد، اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد۔
جزاک اللہ ماہد بھائی۔ और इसके साथ ही मैं दावत दूंगा जनाब बिलाल रिजवी को कि आए और आज की तकरीर से खिताब करें. We have Maulana Bilal Rizvi from Texas, from Dallas, Texas. He will be with us tonight and tomorrow night for 17 and 18 Muharram Majalis, and he will be speaking with us after Maghribain both days. Bar Muhammad wa ale Muhammad salawat.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. جزاكم الله. اللهم صل. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون. ثم الصلاة والسلام على إمام القبلتين ونبي الحرمين وأفضل الثقلين وجد الحسن والحسين الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الصادقين والذين ذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على صاحب الدعوة النبوية والصولة الحيدرية والإسمة الفاطمية والحلم الحسنية والشجاعة الحسينية والعبادة السجادية والمآثر الباقرية والآثار الجعفرية والعلوم الكاذمية والحجج الردوية والجود الثقفية والنقاوة النقوية والهيبة العسكرية والغيبة الإلهية. اللهم عجل فرجه وسهل مخرجه. أما بعد، فقد قال الله في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هو الذي خلقكم من طين ثم قضى أجلا وأجل مسمى عنده ثم أنتم تمترون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the love of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the love of Fatimatu Zahra in particular, a second salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. For the hastening of the reappearance of the master of our time, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. One question which mankind has dealt with since the inception of man as a species, and a question which is universal in the truest sense of the word, is the question pertaining to death and the nature of the life after this world. That's why when you look across human societies and you examine different schools of thoughts and different philosophies, you find them, each of them in one form or another, have given some insight into the question of life after death. Whether it was the philosophers of ancient Greek, whether it was the theologians of medieval Europe, whether it was the philosophers of the Enlightenment or the intellectuals of the modern world, you find that each of them have sought to give some form of an answer to this question. For example, somebody like Socrates, known as Socrates, when they asked him that what is the reality of death, Socrates said that death is the separation of the soul from the body. And the function of the soul is to understand. That's why if a human being wants to understand haqq and the truth, then the soul has to undergo death, because there is a form of knowledge which cannot be acquired except via death. You find this individual presented one understanding. Another philosopher of ancient Greeks by the name of Epicurus gave a completely different answer. He said that death obviously is not something which we have experienced. And because we have not experienced death, then it is not worth it for us to speak about death. You find this was another understanding. Another individual by the name Cicero from ancient Rome, he said that when a person dies, either there is nothing after this world or there is something after this world. There is no other option. If you say that there is nothing after this world, then at the very minimum, this means that your pain is over. But if you say that there is something after this world, then you are reaching that destination. So you see that a number of different individuals, they gave different understandings. But without a doubt, one of the most profound understandings of death and the hereafter is that understanding which has been given by the religious traditions of the world, and in particular Islam and the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. That's why when you look at the kalam of the A'immah and the statements of the A'immah, you find such a familiarity with death that no other human being can claim such a familiarity. As in, I make an open challenge that find me another individual who made a statement like Amir al-Mu'mineen. When Amir al-Mu'mineen says, Wallahi labna Abi Talib anasu bil maut min at-tifli bitadyi ummihi. Amir al-Mu'mineen says in a famous statement that by Allah, the son of Abu Talib is more familiar and comfortable with death than a child is with the bosom of its mother. That a child, when it's an infant, the source of nourishment for that child is the mother. That child knows nothing except for its mother. Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying that this is the level of familiarity I have with death. You see, only an individual who lived his life in such a manner that when he is struck with the sword, he says, Fuztu wa Rabbil Kaaba, that I have been successful by the Lord of the Kaaba. Only such a man can say that I am this comfortable with death. So that's why when you examine the school of Ahlul Bayt, you find that there is a profound understanding which has been given about the nature and the reality of death. But before I come to the crux of the discussion, one question that we need to ask is that at the end of the day, why is it that insan has a fear of death? And why is it, despite knowing that it is the most real of reality, other things in our lives, they may come, they may not come, but death is something which is bound to come. Despite this fact, you find that we naturally have a fear of death. And the answer to as to why we fear death is either one of two answers or both of them. The first answer as to why we fear death is because we don't understand death. You know, there's a tradition which is stated that one of the companions of Imam Ali al-Hadi, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, this companion of the Imam had a particular illness. When the Imam sees this individual, he sees that there is a lot of worry upon the face of that individual. In other words, the illness may not have had as much of an impact as the worry about dying from this illness. So the Imam says to him, "Oh man, why are you in such a state of worry?" That man says, "It is because death is upon me." Imam Ali al-Hadi replies to him by saying that imagine there was a pond. And when you go into that pond, all of the wounds, all of the injuries upon you, all of them are removed. What would you say about such a pond? The man says, without a doubt, this is something which is khair, this is something which is good. Imam Ali al-Hadi says that that pond which I have given this mithal and this example of, this is the reality of death for a believer. That when a mu'min, he undergoes death, this reality, it purifies him. In other words, what this hadith from the Imam shows is that the first reason that we fear death is because we don't understand death. But the second reason as to why we fear death, the answer to this is found in Surah Al-Jum'ah. Within Surah Al-Jum'ah, you find that Allah, He addresses the Jews. And when He addresses the Jews, He says, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ هَادُوا إِن زَعَمْتُمْ أَنَّكُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ لِلَّهِ مِن دُونِ النَّاسِ فَلْيَتَمَنَّوُا الْمَوْتَ إِن كُنتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. The Quran, it says that if you, the Jewish people, think that you are the chosen ones of Allah, you are the friends of Allah and nobody else, then the sign of this friendship with Allah is that you desire that. But then the Quran in the next ayat, it continues. It says, وَلَا يَتَمَنَّوْنَهُ أَبَدًا بِمَا قَدَّمَتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ. It says, but these individuals, they will never desire that. And the reason that they will never desire that is because of what their hands have sent forth. In other words, because of their actions. So the Quran is showing that from the first level, yes, an individual may fear death because he doesn't understand the mahiyya and the true nature of death. But the other reason an individual may fear death is because of the life that they lived a life of hypocrisy. They didn't live a life of virtue. But when an individual has a proper understanding of that, and they live a life of virtue, then that is that maqam where they can say, al-maut ahla min al-asal. That death to me is sweeter than honey. Or they can say, like Hazrat Ali Akbar said, alasna al-haq. That, oh Father, are we not on the truth? And if we are on the truth, then it does not matter if we go towards death or death comes towards us. You see, each of the shuhada on the day of Ashura had such a familiarity and understanding of death that when one sahabi comes to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, and he says to the Imam, akhbirni an ashab al-Husayn, that, oh Imam as-Sadiq, tell me about the companions of Imam al-Husayn. The Imam says, kushifa lahumul ghita hatta ra'aw manazilahum min al-jannah. That these are those individuals that the veils were removed from their eyes until they saw their maqam in paradise. You know, that reality only comes when you are familiar with death. It's stated on the day of Ashura that in the middle of the battle, Burayr ibn Khudayr is seen smiling on the day of Ashura. Another companion, he says to Burayr, oh Burayr, do you not know what's going on? Why are you smiling? Burayr says that I wasn't a person of happiness in this world when I was young. Now that I'm an old man, do you think that I'll be such a person? But he says the reason that I'm smiling is that the only thing between me and paradise is the sword of these individuals. It is their swords, it is this battle, it is death which is in between me and paradise. So you see, it is that understanding which these individuals had. But now when we come to the crux of this analysis, there are many ayat of the Quran which speak about the reality of death. But one of the most interesting verses of the Quran which presents death in a different light is Surah Al-An'am chapter 6 verse 2. Within this chapter, Allah, He says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن طِينٍ ثُمَّ قَضَى أَجَلًا وَأَجَلٌ مُّسَمَّى عِندَهُ ثُمَّ أَنْتُمْ تَمْتَرُونَ. Allah within this ayat, He says that He is the one who created them from clay. And then after that, listen to the translation. Then after that, He decreed their end. He decreed their ajal. But then there is a second ajal. There is a second end which is known with Allah, yet they have doubt. You see, this ayat, it presents death from the aspect of predestination and free will. That it mentions that when it comes to insan, there are two times of death for mankind. One is his ajal, and the other is ajal musamma, a type of death which is known with Allah. Now what each of these means I'll present throughout this discussion. But the point that I'm making is that this ayat that discusses that when it comes to death, how much ikhtiyar do we have in this matter, and how much of this is outside of our realm. So now when you come to this ayat, the first thing which Allah says is هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُمْ, that Allah, He created you, O insan. That when it comes to your creation, this is a matter that you cannot control. You know, when you look in the Quran, we notice that this quality of being Khaliq is one of the sifat of Allah. It is one of the attributes of Allah. But now the question is that can we use this sifat for anyone other than Allah? And this question, it leads us to a discussion on ubudiyah when it comes to the names of Allah. You see, when you look at the Quran dahiran, there are many verses of the Quran that apply this quality of khilqat and creation to other than Allah. For example, when you look at Surah Ali Imran, chapter 3, verse 49, there is a verse where Nabi Isa, he says to the people, فَأَنِّي أَخْلُقُ لَكُم مِّنَ الطِّينِ كَحَيَّةِ الطَّيْرِ فَأَنفُخُ فِيهِ فَيَكُونُ طَيْرًا بِإِذْنِ رَبِّي. He says that I am creating for you out of this clay the form of a bird. Then I will blow into it and it will become a bird by the permission of Allah. Over here, this ayat is using the word khalq for Nabi Isa. That Nabi Isa is creating this bird. For example, another ayat, Surah Al-Mu'minun, it says, فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنُ الْخَالِقِينَ. That, blessed be Allah who is the best of the creators. It uses it in the jama, implying other creators. You see, even though from the verbal aspect, as an action, the Quran applies it to the other individuals. But when it comes to the realm of ubudiyah and the realm of adab, we only use this word khaliq for Allah. In the same way, there are certain things which Allah He does, but we don't call Allah by those titles. For example, in chapter 3, verse 54, it says, وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. That they plot and Allah plots, Allah is the best of plotters. Have you ever seen anyone making a dua and saying, Ya Makir, help me? No, we find that even though Allah, He carries this out, it is not within the realm of adab. Now the question is that if I am saying this word khaliq can only be used for Allah, where do we learn this adab? We learn this adab from the Quran and from the Hadith. That we address Allah in the way that Allah has taught us for us to address Him. In the modern world, many people, they ask the question, is that why do we use the word huwa for Allah? That when the Quran, it says, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ. That say He, Allah, why are we using He? The reason we use He is because Allah used the word He for Himself. That Allah is above gender. Allah is above being male or female. But it is the adab that when you call upon Allah, Allah has taught us how to call upon Him. In the same way, Ahlul Bayt have given us an adab. That when you go to the door of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, the best way to call upon them is the way they've taught you to call upon them. You see, when you read each of these ziyarat of Ahlul Bayt, you are not listening to the fadail of Ahlul Bayt from any zakir and any orator. But you are listening to the fadail of Ahlul Bayt from Imam al-Baqir, from Imam al-Sadiq. In other words, it is Ahlul Bayt telling you the fadail of Ahlul Bayt. And in reality, the peak of ishq and love is to come with adab to their doorstep. That they say, we realize that you are our Shia, and we realize that you have come for our ziyarah, but you address us in the way we've taught you for you to address us. That's why Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, that's why Imam as-Sadiq, in a famous narration, he says to Mufaddal that, O Mufaddal, إِذَا أَتَيْتَ قَبْرَ الْحُسَيْنِ فَقُفْ بِالْبَابِ وَقُلْ هَذِهِ الْكَلِمَاتِ. That, O Mufaddal, that when you go to the ziyarah of my grandfather Hussein, stand at the door and recite these words, O Mufaddal. Don't recite any other words. فَإِنَّ لَكَ بِكُلِّ كَلِمَةٍ كِفْلًا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. That if you recite these words which I have given you, then for every word that you recite, there is a portion of the rahmah and the mercy of Allah for you. So at that level you find that the peak of love, whether it is love for Allah or Ahlul Bayt, you find that it involves adab and etiquette. And this ayat is showing that one level of adab is that the word khaliq is reserved for Allah. That huwa alladhi khalaqakum min teen. Then it says that Allah has created you from clay. The question is that what is clay? Teen is made from water and dirt. It is made from water and khak. So the question is, if teen is made from water and khak, is every human being created out of the same clay, or are people created from different clay? In other words, I'll rephrase my question. Does everyone have the same mizaj and temperament? Or when Allah creates a human being, He creates them with different mizajes and different temperaments over there. You see, when you look at the Quran, if we say that teen is khak and water, the question is there only one type of water in the Quran? Or does the Quran mention that there are different types of waters? If the Quran is mentioning there are different types of waters, then naturally the teen which is used to create must be of different types. And over here in Surah Al-Fatir, in the 35th chapter of the Quran, Allah, He says, هَذَا أَذْبٌ فُرَاتٌ سَائِغٌ شَرَابُهُ وَهَذَا مِلْحٌ أُجَاجٌ. Allah says there is one type of water which is sweet, and that water is pleasant. And that water, when you drink it, it is agreeable. It is something that you will enjoy. But then there is another type of water which is milhun ojaj. That water is salty. That water is bitter. So the Quran is showing that that water is of different types. Now the next question is khak of the same type or is dirt of different types? Over here, once again, the Quran in Surah Al-A'raf, it says, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. That there is one type of khak, there is one type of ground which is tayyib. And the sign of it is that it's fertile, that the plants, they grow forth from it by the permission of Allah. But then it says, وَالَّذِي خَبُطَ لَا يَخْرُجُ إِلَّا نَكِدًا. But then there is another type that it is khabuta, it is one which is destitute, and from it only a small amount comes out. You know, this ayat was actually used by Imam al-Hasan. It stated that one day, Muawiyah, he has a discussion with Imam al-Hasan. And Muawiyah was known for having a very short beard, whereas Imam al-Hasan was known for having a very long beard. So Muawiyah, he says to Imam al-Hasan that why don't you establish from the Quran that it is better to have a longer beard than a shorter beard? Imam al-Hasan, he says that the Quran says, as for that pure land, baladu tayyib, that you find the plants, they come out in abundance. And as for that land which is destitute, only a little comes out. In other words, Imam al-Hasan was giving the ishara that, oh Muawiyah, us Ahlul Bayt are that pure land. that from us, fruit upon fruit, it keeps coming out. But you are from that land which produces that shajaratun khabita. It produces that tree that does not produce anything in reality. So you find in essence that if land is differing and water is differing, then the riwayat, they show that tina, that clay which is used to create insan, it differs. That's why many different individuals, they have a different mizaj. They are able to capitalize on something which another individual is not able to capitalize. You know, each of us, you and I know that there is something which is within our skill set, and this is something which is not within our skill set. You know, one day there was an individual who comes to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. And he comes from outside of Medina. When he comes to the Imam, he says to the Imam that I want to debate you. The Imam says that if you are able to debate my companions and defeat them, then you can debate me. The Imam says very well. He says, I have certain questions about the A'rab of the Quran. You know what the Imam says? The Imam says, go to Humran ibn A'yun. Once Humran, he answers his questions, then he says, I have some questions about Arabic grammar. The Imam doesn't say go to Humran again. The Imam says go to Aban ibn Taghlib. After that, the man says, I have questions about fiqh. Imam as-Sadiq says go to Zurara ibn A'yun. After that, he says that I have questions about Tawheed. The Imam says go to Hisham ibn Salim. He says now I have questions about akhlaq. The Imam says go to Hamza at-Tayyar. Then he says, I have questions about authority and wilaya. He says, go to Hisham ibn al-Hakam. What is Imam as-Sadiq showing? Imam as-Sadiq is showing that even amongst his companions, each of them had a different mizaj. And based upon that mizaj, there was a certain area they had an expertise in. The Imam only gave them ijazah to discuss in what they had an expertise in. In other words, what is within your skill set, act upon it. But if you don't have an aim of something, then at least be silent in that area. So Imam as-Sadiq is showing this reality. Even amongst the ashab of Rasulullah, it is very famous that Abu Dhar al-Ghaffari was not given a position of leadership. But what did Abu Dhar al-Ghaffari do? That he would stand outside of those palaces which would usurp the money of the Muslims, and he would say, those individuals who take the gold and the silver. But then on the other side, you have a companion like Salman. Salman, he is the governor of Madain under the second caliph. On one side, you find that a companion who is a Sahabi, Abu Dhar al-Ghaffari, has a great maqam in the eyes of Allah. But you find leadership was not in the mizaj of Abu Dhar. But Salman, it was within his mizaj. So you find in that sense, when it comes to the khidmah of the deen and the khidmah of Ahlul Bayt, there are different ways, there are different methods. Don't point towards anyone else's method and say it's wrong. Maybe that method is not in your mizaj, but it is in their mizaj. So you find in that sense, there is a diversity based on how Allah has created us. So the ayat, it says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَكُم مِّن طِينٍ ثُمَّ قَضَى أَجَلًا. You see, the word ajal, it literally in the Arabic language means an end point. That's why when you look in Surah Al-Qasas, in the 28th chapter of the Quran, in ayat 28 and ayat 29, when Nabi Musa, he goes to Midian and he meets Prophet Shu'aib, he marries the daughter of Prophet Shu'aib under the condition that he works for the Prophet Shu'aib for either 8 years or 10 years. And Nabi Musa in ayat 28 of Surah 28, he says, ذَلِكَ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكَ. That either 8 or 10, that is a matter which is between me and you. أيما الأجلين قضيت فلا أدوان علي. Whichever of these two terms which is finished, then there is no blame upon me. And then the next ayat it says, فَلَمَّا قَضَى مُوسَى أَجَلًا, and when Musa, he completed his term. So in the literal sense of the word qada, the word ajal, it means an endpoint. But when Allah uses this word in relation to insan, it is referring to the death of mankind. That is why in Surah Al-Ankabut, in chapter 29, verse 5, Allah, He says, لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو لِقَاءَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّ أَجَلَ اللَّهِ لَآتٍ. For those who desire to meet Allah, then the end point which Allah has decreed for man is coming. Now over here in this ayat, the interesting point to note is that it says that number one, Allah has decreed an end for insan. But then there is a second end which is known with Allah. You know what our riwayat they show is that when it comes to insan, there are 2 points of death. There is one point of death which is further from you, that it is a further point. But if you are going to reach it, then you must act virtuously to reach that end point of death. In that way, from one level, death is something which Allah has decreed. But from the second level, you find death is something which at one level is in the hands of a human being. That's why the hadith, they say that the one who does silatul rahim, Allah extends the life of that individual. Or the individual who gives sadaqah, Allah extends the life of that individual. You know, now the question it comes up is that why did Allah decree 2 deaths? Why not decree one and call it the end of the day? The answer to that, at one level, is that Allah is showing that, oh insan, your dua has a capacity. Your dua has an ability. You know, there is no dua from Ahlul Bayt which says, shorten my life. The only dua which says this is the dua of Imam Zainul Abidin, where he says that if my life, it becomes a pasture for shaitan, then under that shart, take my life away. But other than that, when you look at the du'as, we're saying, oh Allah, extend my life, prolong my life. You see, what this is going to show is that, oh human being, that there is always a change in the decree of Allah. Not that the zat of Allah doesn't change, but decree can always change. You know, there's an interesting verse of the Quran. The Jews, when they saw their conditions in Medina, they had this belief that when Allah decreed something, correct? After that, they could do nothing. In other words, their hands were tied. So they would say over there, in this ayat, they would say that Yadullahi maghlulatun, that the hands of Allah are tied. That Allah has decided something, and that's it. It's game over for us. But the Quran, it replies to them by saying that it is not the hands of Allah which are tied, بَلْ يَدَاهُ مَبْسُوطَتَانِ, but rather غُلَّتْ أَيْدِيهِمْ, but rather it is their hands which are tied, وَلُعِنُوا بِمَا قَالُوا, and la'na is being sent upon them for what they are saying. In other words, from this entire discussion, the key takeaway is this, is that, oh insan, as a human being, Allah has given you ikhtiyar, and out of this free will, there's many aspects of your life which you are able to change. But one thing which you need to understand is that when it comes to the qada and the decree of Allah, you submit to the decree of Allah. And that is why many individuals in Islamic history, one of their key issues was they did not submit to the decree of Allah, whether it was about themselves or the maqam of Ahlul Bayt. You see, the maqam of Ahlul Bayt is something which Allah has given them. If you and I pray 1,000 units of salat every night, we will not become Ali ibn Abi Talib. Amir al-Mu'mineen in Nahj al-Balagha, he says, there were many individuals who were killed on the day of Uhud, But it is only our uncle Hamza who became Sayyid al-Shuhada. And there were other individuals who were shaheed other than my brother Ja'far. But he is the one who became at-tayyar and was given wings in paradise. So in that sense, you find that they didn't accept the decree of Allah. No, I'll give you another example. There is a riwayah which Allama al-Hilli in his famous book Minhajul Karama he quotes. There's a famous book of Allama al-Hilli which has been translated into English now as well. Minhajul Karama fi Ma'rifat al-Imama. And Allama al-Hilli, he quotes this hadith from a Sunni Shafi'i jurist by the name of Ibn al-Maghazili. In that hadith it stated that one day Rasulullah is in Masjid al-Nabawi. And as Rasulullah is in Masjid al-Nabawi, all of the companions of the Prophet are surrounding Rasulullah. And as they're surrounding Rasulullah, there is a shooting star which is going through the heavens. As that shooting star is going to the skies, all of them, they look at that star and they say to Rasulullah, "Oh Rasulullah, explain this." Rasulullah says, the only explanation I'll give is that wherever this star it lands, that will be the house of my successor and my wasi. It's stated in the riwayah that that star, it lands at the house of Ali bin Abi Talib. When that star, it lands at the house of Ali ibn Abi Talib, all of them, they turn to Rasulullah and they say, "Ya Rasulullah, you have surely gone beyond the had and the bounds in your love of Ali." Rasulullah at that point, he replies to them by saying, Allah has revealed the ayat of the Quran. They say, which ayat has Allah revealed? The verses are, وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى وَمَا يَنْتَقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ. It says, by the star and when it sets. Your companion has not made a mistake, nor does he err from the right path. Whatever he says is of the revelation of Allah. So you find the reality of these individuals is that they did not accept that decree of Allah. But if they had accepted that decree, you find that it would have elevated their daraja. You know, many people, they ask the question that if Imam al-Hussein knew what would happen on the day of Ashura, why does Imam al-Hussein still go towards Karbala? Does this not lower the status of the Imam? You see, if I told you what day you're going to die, even if that day is 50 years from now, you're going to spend your life in worry because that knowledge has been made available to you. But the maqam of Sayyid al-Shuhada is this, that despite Allah opening the door of that aim for the Imam, he says that ridan biqada'ihi wa tasliman li'amrih. That, oh Allah, whatever you decree, Hussein is radhi with it. And whatever you say, Hussein, he submits to it. Whether it means giving a son like Ali Akbar on the day of Ashura, or whether it is the knowledge of what would happen to his sister Zainab after the day of Ashura. You know, when the 11th of Muharram it came, it stated that Sayyida Zainab, she says to Shimar that, "Oh Shimar, do not take us through the Maqtal of Karbala. Because these women, they can't handle the bodies of the Shuhada." But it stated that that army of Umar bin Saad, when they take the women of Ahlul Bayt, they take them through the middle of the Maqtal. That each of the women would go to the body of their beloved. That Layla would go to the body of Ali Akbar. and Farwa would go to the body of Qasim. But it stated that as each woman would go to the body of their children, Sayyida Zainab only goes to the body of Imam al-Hussein. And it's related in certain maqatil that when she comes to the body of the Imam, she says, Anta akhi, that are you my brother Hussein? Then she says, Wa Muhammada wa Rasulullah, هذا الحسين المرمل بالدماء. She says, O Rasulullah, look at your Hussein, O Rasulullah, that your Hussein is covered in blood. You know, it's stated that Sayyida Zainab, a point it comes when Imam Zainul Abidin is going past the body of his father. And as Imam Zainul Abidin is going past the body of his father, that the color upon the face of Imam Zainul Abidin, it begins to change. At that point, Sayyida Zainab says, Atajudu binafsik ya baqiyata jaddi wa ikhwati. That she says, why is it sajjad? That I see that the color, it's as if your nafs is about to leave your body, O sajjad. The Imam says, oh my aunt, what can a son do when he sees the body of his father in such a manner? But I say, oh Zainul Abidin, this is only the 11th of Muharram. A point will come on the 13th of Muharram as Banu Asad is standing by the bodies of the Shuhada, and you'll return to the land of Karbala. And as you return to the land of Karbala, they'll say, O Qadi, O captive, how do we bury the bodies? Imam Zainul Abidin will say that make one grave for the Shuhada. As they're burying the Shuhada, they'll come to Imam Zainul Abidin. They'll say, O captive, there is one body by the Furat. Whenever we pick up one side of that body, the other side it falls on the ground. When we pick the other side of that body, the other side it breaks. The Imam says, that is the body of my Chacha Abbas. He says, I will bury that body. After that, Imam Zainul Abidin, he says, oh Banu Asad, step back. Now is that point where I'll bury my father. It's stated that the Imam, he places a piece of cloth on the ground. You know why he places that cloth on the ground? He places that cloth because he wants to gather the pieces of the body of Sayyid al-Shuhada. He begins to bury the Imam. As he's burying Imam al-Hussein, he hears a voice from the cut body of the Imam. That voice, it says, Tifli, Tifli, that where is my infant? Imam Zainul Abidin says, O Banu Asad, where is the body of Ali Asghar? Imam is Sajjad. He places Ali Asghar on the chest of his father. He places Ali Akbar by the feet of his father. He writes on the grave, هذا قبر أبي عبد الله الذي قتل غريب وجشانا على لعنة الله للقوم الظالمين سيعلم الذين ظلموا أيام منقلب ينقلبون ماتم حسين يا حسين يا حسين
Ya Hussein, 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 یا حسین 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 عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے جب شام و سحر فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ درا لیے پہرے پہ ستمگار کھڑا ہے درا لیے پہرے پہ ستمگار کھڑا ہے کیسے تیرے لاشے پہ سکینہ تجھے روئے کیسے تیرے لاشے پہ سکینہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے جس وقت اٹھایا نہ گیا لاشا جواں کا جس وقت اٹھایا نہ گیا لاشا جواں کا شے اس گھڑی اکبر سے زیادہ تجھے روئے شے اس گھڑی اکبر سے زیادہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے زینب نے کہا شام غریباں میں غازی زینب نے کہا شام غریباں میں غازی بے پردہ مجھے دیکھ کے بابا تجھے روئے بے پردہ مجھے دیکھ کے بابا تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ سجدے کے لیے جب لیا ہاتھوں کا سہارا سجدے کے لیے جب لیا ہاتھوں کا سہارا تو سجاد مصلی پہ ہمیشہ تجھے روئے سجاد مصلی پہ ہمیشہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے بن ہاتھوں کے کس طرح تو گھوڑے سے گرا تھا بن ہاتھوں کے کس طرح تو گھوڑے سے گرا تھا یہ سن کے بہت اہل مدینہ تجھے روئے یہ سن کے بہت اہل مدینہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے مشقیزہ کہیں جسم کہیں ہاتھ کہیں ہے
مشقیزہ کہیں جسم کہیں ہاتھ کہیں ہے، جا جا کے کہاں فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے، جا جا کے کہاں فاطمہ زہرا تجھے روئے، عباس تیرا زمانہ تجھے روئے، عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے، ارمان سکینہ کا تھا جتنا تجھے روتی، ارمان سکینہ کا تھا جتنا تجھے روتی، سجاد تیری قبر پہ اتنا تجھے روئے، سجاد تیری قبر پہ اتنا تجھے روئے، عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے، عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے، عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ تجھے روئے، عباس تیرا حق ہے زمانہ، جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، آل عمران نے کہا اور زندہ نے کہا، یہ بہن قید ہوئی تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، ہم کو پانی نہ ملے تیری خوشبو تو رہے، تیرے بازو نہ کٹے چاہے مشکیزہ چھدے، یہ مگر ہو نہ سکا تیرے بازو ہے جدا، مجھ پہ ہے تشنا لبی تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، اور قید خانے میں قضا جب سکینہ کو ملی، دے کے کرتے کا کفن بچی دفنائی گئی، ارے اس گھڑی نام تیرا صورت ناد علی دکھ میں دہراتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چھنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، قید خانے میں قضا جب سکینہ کو ملی، دیکھے کرتے کا کفن بچی دفنائی گئی، اس گھڑی نام تیرا صورت ناد علی دکھ میں دہراتی رہی، تو نہ آیا غازی، جب ردا سر سے چنی میں صدا دیتی رہی، تو نہ آیا تھا گئے ہے برہنا میرا سر کیا نہیں تجھ کو خبر اے علمدار وفا اس گھر کو باخدا تجھ سے ڈارستی بڑی تو نہ آیا غازی جب ردا سر سے چنی میں سزا دیتی رہی تو نہ آیا غازی
یا حسین
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 یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین صلی علی محمد
صلی اللہ علیہ یا رسول اللہ السلام علیک یا نبی اللہ السلام علیک یا حبیب اللہ السلام علیک یا خیر خلق اللہ السلام علیک یا محمد ابن عبداللہ خاتم النبیین احسن اللہ لک الاداء فی ولدک الحسین الغریب السلام علیک یا مولانا یا امیر المومنین علی ابن ابی طالب السلام علیک یا مولاتی یا فاطمة الزہراء سیدۃ النساء العالمین